Welcome to Natural Resources University. This week's episode features Habitat University, hosted by Jared Brook and Adam Jenke.
Welcome to Habitat University. This podcast is your source for the science behind wildlife habitat management and is part of the Natural Resources University podcast network. We're your host, Jared Brook.
And I'm Adam Jenke, and we're both biologists and extension wildlife specialists. If you're interested in wildlife habitat management or looking for ways to improve your property for wildlife, this is the podcast for you.
So join us as we talk with researchers, managers, and landowners all about the latest research and the ins and outs of wildlife habitat management.
Welcome back to Habitat University. We are continuing our exploration of 50 solutions to the Private Lands Challenge. And this week, Jared took the lead on the episode and went not too far away from Indiana down to Kentucky. So Jared, who'd you have on from Kentucky this week?
Yes, we moved a little bit farther east this time and closer to home. And it was actually really closer to home for me, neighboring state, but I also used to work in Kentucky as a farm bill biologist, so working on private lands. So it's good to catch up with some of my former colleagues. And we had on Jacob Stewart, who is the private lands coordinator for the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, or KDFWR, as well as Cody Roden, who is the small game coordinator for the state agency, KDFWR. So they gave us kind of two different perspectives on private lands conservation in the bluegrass state. Jacob provided a kind of the holistic look at how their philosophy on private lands conservation in the state. And Cody gave us the perspective of someone who's in charge of managing or in doing research in the statewide management of certain species like small game, bobwhite, cottontails, and some of the work that he's involved in, as well as Jacob, to try to increase populations of those species statewide.
That's really cool. Yeah, those are like sort of classic farmland game, farmland wildlife. And I think at least implicitly, we've always known that their conservation is tied to decisions that private landowners make.
And we talk about that in the episode. Cody brings that up, how his position used to be called like the farmland game research biologist, something of that effect.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'm really excited to hear it. So thanks for doing the hard work this week, Jared. Listeners, as always, please give us some feedback by going to the show notes after you've listened to the episode and telling us what you think, suggestions you have for improvements, or what you're doing with stuff you're learning from Habitat University. We'll cut to the show now.
All right, so we're continuing our exploration of private lands conservation around the country. And this time we're going to go a little bit farther east. Last episode, we were talking about a national perspective and then got a state perspective on private lands conservation with Ray Aberle in Colorado. We're moving east. We're headed to the Bluegrass State, and we're going to talk about private lands conservation in Kentucky. And so we have a couple of guests with us today that are going to talk about how wildlife habitat management work is done on private lands in the Bluegrass State. So I'll let those guests go ahead and introduce themselves, and then we'll get rolling with some questions. So Jacob and Cody, if you guys want to introduce yourselves, let us know who you are and what you do with KDFWR, and maybe what KDFWR stands for.
Yeah, Jared, thank you for having us, first off. And KDFWR stands for Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. I'm Jacob Stewart, and I am the private lands coordinator for Kentucky, as well as the fire management officer. So basically, I'm over 17 biologists within the state that are put there to help landowners manage their property and give them technical advice going forward.
Yeah, my name is Cody Roden. I'm the small game program coordinator. So at KDFWR, or Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, we're not unlike other states in the United States and our state wildlife agency. Our state wildlife agency is broken down in divisions. So we're both in the wildlife division. We have the law enforcement division, fisheries division, and 4 other divisions. Within the wildlife division, we're further broken down into programs. Jacob's over the private lands program, and then we have taxa-specific programs like the big game program where our elk herd is managed. fur bear program, where things that we trap for, like foxes and bobcats, is handled. And so the small game program, which I'm the coordinator of, we take after the quail, squirrels, and rabbits in the state. And so a lot of what we do in the program is to try to build habitat for those animals. And because Kentucky is mostly privately owned, and I think we'll get a little bit more into that later, but we're always trying to push habitat initiatives in the private lands of Kentucky.
Okay, so you talked about, you introduced their private land. So give me your elevator pitch on why private lands are important and why private lands conservation work is important in Kentucky.
Well, as Cody alluded to, 90+%, I think 93 or so percent of Kentucky is privately owned, as well as I think it's around 85% of our constituents, the hunters who pay, help support Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, hunt on privately owned land. So if you put that in perspective of where our opportunity is to manage populations and species, and the opportunities for our constituents to enjoy them, it's on the private land. So the importance to ensure that people continue to have opportunities and we keep populations at a nice stable for game and non-game species alike, it's really important to put effort into private lands management, put the effort into providing the right landscape. I do like the term of land use dictates wildlife use. So depending on how you use the land, depends on what kind of wildlife will use the land. So that's what, specifically my program is here, is to help landowners find out how they can integrate management into their day-to-day work to support the populations they're interested in, whether that be deer, elk, turkey, butterflies, bees, anything across the board. And management for all those species can go hand in hand. So that's kind of the reason and importance of a private lands program.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jacob. And I think that's definitely a good elevator speech, and that's the main point. It's just a math problem, right? So 93% of the state is privately owned. The vast majority of the landscapes the wildlife that we care about exist in private land, and as Jacob mentioned, our constituents also utilize that private land more. I'd like to add a third. Private land in the Commonwealth and in the United States is the most rapidly changing of the two, public versus private land. Public land, in a sense, can be more static, but in our private lands, it's more, initiatives change, production changes over time. If we think about just the last 50 or 60 years, there's been a lot of changes in the state of Kentucky. Not only actually the land use change, but also how people use that land. And so there's been, farming practices have gotten cleaner and cleaner over time, which means there's less marginal space for wildlife. So the way we use even our working lands has changed. And then urbanization and the amount of highly developed land has almost doubled since the 1980s. And so again, private land is the most rapidly changing. And so if we can get in there and be part of those conversations, that's definitely a good thing to be part of that conversation for sure.
Yeah, and what you all explained and talked about is exactly what we see here in Indiana, right? We're up there, high 90s, mid 90s percentage private land. So we're a private land state like a lot of eastern states. And I think one of the things that you talked about when you talked about ever changing, and it's the most changing, is also who owns the land's changing, right? It's passing down generations, and those generations may have different views on how the land should be used or what importance there is, whether it's agricultural use or wildlife conservation or what. So it's definitely a challenge to work on private lands. So in a nutshell, can you describe the private lands program in Kentucky?
Yeah, so the private lands program in Kentucky is, again, as I mentioned when I introduced this, there's 17 biologists on the landscape that are here to help landowners with technical guidance. And we'll probably cover this throughout this conversation, but through USDA programs, there is quite a bit of money that's available for landowners. And
That's great. I think that's a good overview, and it's nice to hear, and it's nice to hear how integrated you all are with NRCS. And we had the Indiana biologist from NRCS on a few episodes ago to talk about all those alphabet soup of cost share programs and stuff. And it's great that your biologists are integrated in that system, because it's a hard thing for landowners to navigate. So I think having that integration can help get those programs better out to the public. But also, not all those NRCS employees have that wildlife biology or conservation background. So it kind of helps go both ways, where your biologists, right, they can provide that technical assistance to landowners, and they can kind of fit those programs for landowners and help NRCS deliver the wildlife side of those programs, right?
Yeah, and something that I think we all need to keep in the back of our minds is we always jump to the money aspect of wildlife management, and as we're all aware, it costs a lot of money to manage for wildlife and put that stuff on the ground. But I think one of the bigger things that we lose is when we only worry about trying to talk about the money aspect, is the education aspect, and the portion and the importance of educating the public of what they're doing, why they're doing it, how it's important not only for a rabbit or a quail, but for water quality, and sometimes with like precision ag and stuff like that. It's actually good for your bottom line. So having somebody there to have a one-on-one conversation, not just about, you can make money in this program, but the idea of why you're doing it, how it helps not only you, but the greater good. And having those people there to have a conversation with. We all get frustrated when we make a conference call and we never get anybody to talk to. So having those people on the landscape out there, as many of them as we can to talk to, I think is how we're going to, turn the page of pushing habitat further down the road.
So what are some of the ways that your biologists in the field are involved in that education aspect?
Meetings, outreach meetings, field days, farm field days, and some of the stuff we're starting to go towards a more focused approach with management. I think we'll talk about some wins that we've had through private lands management here in a little bit, and those wins have all shown us that on a focused approach and putting habitat on a focused area, we have a greater good. It's better involved with the amount we can get on the ground and the benefit for the species we're managing. So a focused approach where we actually, go work with the PVA to get information, to do mailings, do calls, to say, hey, this is available for you. Come talk to us. Because the worst thing, we're all biologists. We're not marketing people. We don't market ourselves very well. And I think that's the biggest fall we have in the private lands aspect is the busy, the busy private landowners that we try to talk to or that are out there, they don't know we're here. They're not looking necessarily. Not saying that they don't want to use us, but they just don't know about us. So, trying to reach out to these landowners and let them know, hey, we're here. We're here to help you. We're here to give you some assistance and some guidance. That's the best way we've found. And honestly, we haven't found the true answer to how to do that outreach. That outreach is, we've tried mailings, we've tried just, meetings and extension offices. They all have different impacts, but the outreach is a really hard thing for us to figure out how to hit. So that's something we're trying to work down the road on trying to get to.
And one other thing that we do utilize is trying to capitalize on the connections of each private lands biologist in that community. So these are people that live in the counties that they work in, and oftentimes they have good connections with the working landowners or just the people that are interested in wildlife habitat. And so we utilize or take advantage of those connections and pull in other professional resources. Like for instance, the National Bobwhite and Grasslands Initiative, formerly the NBCI. So we might pull in someone from there that's an expert on grazing native warm season grass, a practice that helps wildlife, helps create more marginal space in these working lands. Jake and I are also involved in the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council, and so this is a great resource for private landowners in the state, as well as fire practitioners in general. And so we utilize the Kentucky Prescribed Fire Council to go in and train groups of private landowners on how to apply prescribed fire on their property, which prescribed fire is a great land management tool, and it's something that, at least in the Mid-South, has kind of disappeared from the private lands over time. And so again, just kind of utilizing the connections of our private lands biologists and bringing in other outside technical expertise to teach them certain aspects of habitat management moving forward.
Awesome. Being an extension, I'm always keen on the outreach and education portion, so it's good to hear. So what kind of day-to-day activities are the private lands biologists involved in? Like what services do they provide to landowners? What kind of questions do they get from landowners? That kind of stuff.
Well, their day-to-day is answering the questions from the public. First off, is they get a call and they say, I'm interested in X species. Will you come give me some advice? And they will come to your property. They'll have maps. They'll talk to you about what your goals and objectives are for your property, and see how we can integrate the wildlife management into your day-to-day management. Not to, you range from working with landowners from working lands all the way to hobby farmers. So you kind of need to have a wide background of knowledge, to help you answer the questions and meet the needs of these people. And that's where it kind of helps being in the NRCS office, because if a landowner calls you up and says, I'm interested in deer and I'm running a cattle farm, well, there may be an opportunity there for you to cover a whole bunch of different stuff, all the way from how to do prescribed grazing, all the way and how that can help with, I'll let Cody hit on how prescribed grazing can help with quail, to buffers on the stream for water quality. And so you may meet his needs on making him a more efficient cattle operation, and making more money on his cattle while meeting the needs of what he enjoys with deer, quail, and that kind of aspect of stuff too. So the day-to-day is trying to work management into their system, wildlife management into their system. And the other part of their job is the actual paperwork involved with getting people into these programs, getting plans in, and making sure that the contracts are running well for NRCS side of stuff. So that may be kind of how our private lands system is a little bit different from other states, is that they work hand in hand with NRCS on the contracting and the technical guidance. Some other states have just technical guidance for NRCS programs and private lands. We've kind of joined them two together, and our private lands program covers all things private lands management.
Yeah, and more specifically, everything that Jacob just mentioned, how that actually plays out. A private lands biologist will be in an NRCS office. They'll get a call. They'll actually go out with the landowner to their property, walk around, have a look at what they're working with, and again, try to implement their technical guidance or guidance on how to meet their objectives out in the field. Then they'll go back to the office, build a plan that landowner can look at and actually do day to day. So, okay, it's February. I need to make sure my fire breaks are in because I want to do a late winter, early spring prescribed fire to encourage some native grasses. And I said that I wanted more turkey nesting habitat. And so I know that I need some more of these grasses around on my farm. And so again, they'll build them a plan and also handle or help walk them through the paperwork associated with NRCS if there's any kind of cost share or any of those types of programs available for their land.
Okay, so it's like a one-stop shop for planning, right? You go all the way from the field visit to getting the paperwork done and getting the habitat on the ground.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's and helping landowners weed through the idea of filling out federal paperwork. I mean, that's in itself it can be a job. It's definitely not a straightforward process that you get through.
You mean it's not just like a one-page sheet, there's not.
No, it's so I try to always let people make them aware of that there is no such thing as free money. You're going to have some headache, but that's what the biologists are there for, to help them see their way through it and see their way how these programs can help them get through it.
Yeah, having lived this life for a couple of years down there in Kentucky, working as a farm bill biologist, and being inside an NRCS office, I see that value of, especially the paperwork side, because it helps on both sides, where you're helping the landowner kind of navigate through this process of how to fit these programs fit these programs to their property and their management objectives. But you're also helping NRCS see the side of how these practices fit wildlife conservation and how they can and see even as minute details of like planting rates and management rates, that they kind of have a broad setup for, you could use X, Y, and Z species inside of NRCS specifications, but then the biologist gets to tailor those specifications to meet those landowner objectives. So having those people in those offices is a huge asset on both sides.
Oh yeah,
for
that's
sure.
a great point.
Yeah, for sure. It's like I said, in a perfect world, it all should work back and forth. A give and take of learning and figuring out the best option for each landowner on how they can reach their management goals of whatever it is on wildlife and working lands. And I think that's one of the big things that we're trying to move towards more and more, is the idea of wildlife in the working land setting. As we started as an agency in the private land setting, basically, we put our names out there. We were part of Forest Stewardship Program, actually. So we were actually partners with Division of Forestry and worked through a little program they had to push conservation. So it was just like a side thing for forestry, that we were there to help point people to habitat management. And then it slowly built from the 90s on that we were here to give technical guidance to landowners. And for the longest time, it still was just, word of mouth, passing it on, shotgun approach of stuff here and there. Working with the hobby farmer or the person who has solely recreational land, not putting our foot totally into the working lands, the row crops, the
grazing,
timber,
yeah.
The timber harvest. We didn't throw ourselves fully into that, which that's kind of our next step, and where we're trying to see ourselves going is trying to figure out where all those things cross with wildlife and where we can integrate good management on their part and good management on the wildlife part to get the best of both worlds. And the realization that we're working on a landowner's property who has goals and objectives that we have to fit our stuff into. They may not be necessarily interested in wildlife, but if I can show them that if they do some native warm season grass grazing, it'll help them in their cattle production. They don't necessarily need to know that it helps quail at all, but by doing it, it is helping the quail aspect of stuff. And I'll let Cody kind of talk about kind of initiatives we're pushing with warm season grass grazing that his program's pushing right now.
Yeah, great. That's awesome, because I was just going to get to the question of how have you guys been integrating wildlife conservation and working land? So there's a perfect setup.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate Jacob touching on that. So before I get into that, we're talking about this whole working lands, production aspect of wildlife in the state of Kentucky. And this isn't a new idea by any means, and we know it can work because historically, farming, Indiana and Kentucky, a lot of the states around us too are very similar. A lot of these game species and non-game species that are in precipitous decline today, we're doing a lot better in the 60s and 70s, and it was because of farming practices, right? It was because of crop rotations. Everybody didn't have a bush hog, and so there was a lot of marginal areas grown up. And my program, the small game program, was referred to as the farm game program, right? Because these small game species were truly a byproduct of these production operations. We might not think of it as an operation when they own 80 acres and they got a tobacco plot, some annual grains, and a little bit of row crop and some grazing all in one place now, right? That looks different today, that looks a lot different today. We have a lot more monocropping, or people are specializing in one production thing, like they only have cows, or they only have corn, soybeans, right? There's a lot less of this diversity in the production lands than there used to be. And so essentially what we're trying to do is infuse a little bit of that, just a tiny bit of that moving forward. And that stuff, like Jacob mentioned, it not only helped the wildlife. Again, the wildlife were a byproduct. Nobody was really managing for wildlife. It was just a pleasant byproduct. And so they did those things because the equipment was a lot different, 60, 70 years ago, right? But also, soil health and, water quality and things like that. Farmers figured out that if they did crop rotations and stuff like that, it would benefit their forage base or stuff like that. And so at this point, we're trying to infuse some of that moving forward. And a couple of examples we have in the state right now is trying to push native warm season grass as a forage base. So in Kentucky and I'd say the southern half of Indiana, right, kind of the fescue belt, if anyone's ever heard of that, but most of the forage for cattle. So Kentucky is one of the top cattle producers, definitely east of the Mississippi, because we have a lot of open land that is full of this introduced grass called fescue. And so fescue is a cool season grass that forms kind of a turf on the ground. It grows really close together. It's much different than the native grass we had in the state that quail and other wildlife species adapted to through time. And so this is new for the wildlife in the state. It's been around since the late 30s, and it was planted a lot in like the 70s and 80s. And so most of this forage land in the state of Kentucky, roughly, there's about 5 million acres of open land. Some of that's row crop. More of it is grazing land in the state of Kentucky. And so most of those 5 million acres is planted in this fescue grass. And so it's a cool season grass, so it puts on most of its growth in the cool season, right? So the early to mid to late spring, and then it kind of shuts off its growth in the summer, and in the middle of the summer and towards the end of the summer, early fall in the state of Kentucky. And so when that shuts off, it's not growing, and so the cows are kind of, not able to eat as much of that and put on more weight. So if you're a cattle producer anywhere, what do you want? You want more pounds of beef out on your pasture, and then that equates more dollars down the road. And so fescue is a good forage base in the Mid-South because it can take overgrazing, or it can take some abuse, but it shuts off in the summer, and there's a toxic fungus that grows inside of a lot of the fescue forage base in the state of Kentucky. And so what we're pushing now is this native plant, that grows kind of in bunches. It can grow very tall if you let it go. but it's a plant that puts on most of its growth. It's a native warm season grass. So this grass will complement these landowners' current forage management, which again is mostly fescue, by growing more in the warm season. In the summer, it's putting on its highest growth. It does not have any endophyte fungus that we talked about earlier about fescue. It does need a little bit different management regime. So you can't kind of just throw your cows out there and let them eat on it all year. You have to put them on there at specific times. And so it needs a little bit more herd management. So what we're doing now is going out into some of these communities in the state of Kentucky, counties that are very high cattle producers in the state, and we're working with landowners through our private lands biologists. So we've asked our private lands biologists, hey, who in these counties are really good, respected cattlemen? Are they people that the other cattlemen look up to and they see what they do? And so we've approached those people and said, hey, just try this native warm season grass as a forage base. We'll give you free seed, free herbicide. We'll help you plant it. We'll help you get this stand established along with your cool season grasses to help you. Essentially, we've been selling it as this will help your forage management. You'll have a forage resource in August, whereas your fescue is just kind of sitting there not growing. You can take your cows and put them on this small plot with native warm season grass on it. And again, they won't have any of the toxic properties that some of the fescue has. And this grass is very deep rooted, right? Again, it changed through time in the state of Kentucky. It's been here for a really long time. It's very drought resistant. The benefits go on and on for the producer, but in the background, we're also hoping to see wildlife benefit from that, whether it's quail nesting in it or meadowlarks or whatever, any of these open native species that historically were a lot more common in the state of Kentucky.
Okay, so that's an awesome way to kind of integrate that stuff on working landscape. So where it makes sense for the cattle operator, right? You're not trying to take area out of production to benefit wildlife. You're trying to integrate it right there in the farm.
Exactly.
Do you have any examples of where you guys have done that in the state? Maybe on private land or other areas in the state?
Yeah, so we currently have two programs, one in Madison County, which is kind of the central part of the state, and one in Greene County, which is kind of in the south central part of the state. And so Madison County is the number one cattle producing county in the state. There's a lot of fescue pasture in that county. And so we've gone in, talked to, at this point, about 14 or 15 landowners and convinced them to put a small part of their forage operation into big blue stem and Indian grass. So these are two really common native warm season grass species, and they're ones that were native to the state of Kentucky. And actually what we've done is we've picked a lot of that grass from an area that had a remnant native warm season grass stand. So this grass stand has been owned by the Department of Defense for a really long time. And so there's still native stands of these native plants that we go in and we pick that seed, and then we take it from that area and we take it oftentimes less than a mile down the road and plant it into the farms that are grazing for cattle production. And so we've been doing that for the last 3 years in Madison County, last 2 years in Greene County. And we have, all told, probably almost 300 acres in the ground across probably about 30 landowners. So not a large amount, but again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible for the landowner. We're saying take a little bit offline and let us establish this stand. And our private lands biologists are working very closely with those production landowners and working with them to get their stand established and talking with them about, how do you cut this for hay? It's a little bit different than cutting your normal hay lands, right? How do you graze this stuff so you can only have your cattle in there again when this forage is putting on mast, which is in the summer.
Great. So
it's a lot of this comes back to is the idea of education as well. Just planting the grasses for forage doesn't produce the habitat. The management of the grasses is what produces the habitat, as well as good management of the grasses is the way you put weight on the cattle. So educating the landowner on the proper management he needs to do for this is key. If they don't manage it correctly, it won't work as well. And so it all comes back to education and informing landowners on the best way to, again, integrate this stuff into their system. And again, not only it helps them, but it helps us as well. At the end of the day, I'd love to have NRCS going out here selling warm season grasses for the sole purpose of grazing and proper management. And I don't even need to be called as a wildlife person to do that. That's at the end of the day. Not saying NRCS is not doing that, because they are. They're good partners in doing this. But the idea of the wildlife benefits coming from something that the ag community is pushing is where we need to get to. The same way with row crops and precision agriculture. What we really want is, we don't want the person's best, most high yield property. What we want is the stuff that's not as high yield, and you set aside, and there's programs to help offset the cost for them doing that. And some of that stuff actually makes sense with precision ag to stop planting altogether. Through programs and looking at how much input you put into it and the cost of seed and the yield you get over 10 years on that piece of property, it may not be worth planting. So the idea, again, of looking at opportunities for us to integrate wildlife management into these systems is the perfect match of, like, again, pushing land use to get wildlife. Are the road we want to go down. And I think this is a big push nationwide. This is not unique to Kentucky. There's a lot of people doing this. And I'm glad, because it's going to take a lot of information and education to get landowners to see the benefits of some of this that we're talking about. So it's a big push, and it's kind of exciting. And another project we're doing, this is on the timber side of stuff, is a focused conservation project that we're doing, actually in the name for the Working Lands for Wildlife, NRCS, Bob White initiative. And it's looking at coming into an area that is old reverted farms that since the bout of tobacco in Kentucky and just some other, the land is not as productive, have become more recreational or not as highly used as for agriculture, has been grown up into a whole lot of cedar. So we're focusing our efforts on a 30,000 acre area that is about 15,000 acres shows that it has some kind of cedar component. Within this area, there is a cedar sawmill and a pulp mill that does kitty litter. That's pretty close to it. So we're trying to work to get loggers and landowners and mills all set up together to realize that the cedar has a value, so that they can utilize the loggers and foresters to help push the wildlife aspect of opening some of these areas up to create a better, diverse habitat across the landscape, because it's basically went from being a grassland type open system to a closed canopy cedar reverting to forest. So trying to get into the realm of working with landowners and seeing how they can use timber harvest or precision ag or grazing to meet their needs is where our hopes are.
Great. So you've talked a lot about how your private lands program has shifted from kind of a shotgun approach to a more focused approach. Can you describe kind of what you mean by focused approach?
Well, it's either the focus. The project I was just talking about, as far as the cedar, it was driven by land type or land use, or I guess land cover would be the better, the dominant land cover, and what we needed to do to manipulate that to make it better quail habitat. So we took, and we could have taken 3 or 4 counties worth of a stretch of the outer bluegrass of Kentucky, but to focus it down, we kind of picked where it bottlenecked, where it was a 30,000 acre area that connected kind of an area where we have a quail project going now and another more open, diverse landscape on the other side. So we figure if we work in this focused efforts in doing work here, we can try to have some connectivity and build a bigger, say, quail landscape for this focus project. And you could also go on the idea of land cover, land use, could also be a driver of trying to, if we want to we use land use down in Greene County for a focused conservation project. The majority of it was grazed type land. So we figured let's make a focused project and push native warm season grasses. So so land use, land cover are two main ones that I think, or you could look at, if you have a species that's endangered, let's say it's a stream, like, it's only in this stream, it's only here. So you focus your efforts and your outreach on trying to hit that one species. That one there, I don't like it as much because it's more narrowed, but let's face it, if a fish is in a stream, it's in a stream. It can't get up and walk away. So we need to address how to meet the needs of that. So.
And we've had some experience in the state in the past. So Jacob mentioned our forest stewardship biologists in the 90s. That's kind of how we started in private lands conservation. That has evolved through time, and so has how we kind of looked at how we strategically implement private lands conservation in the state. So for the first 15 or 20 years of that program, the private lands program from the 90s on, the first 15 to 20 years, we did shotgun habitat, kind of go out and go out and do good work, is what we told our private lands biologists. And through time, we were doing good work. We were working with landowners, we were managing habitat, providing technical guidance. But when we look at the statewide indices of not only our game species like quail and rabbits, but also the non-game species on, statewide and national trends, they were still declining. So that kind of told us, we're likely not touching, in the shotgun approach, we were likely not touching the amount of acres we needed to make a statewide difference in some of these populations of animals, right? We certainly knew how to make a difference, and I believe we do know how to make a difference on a small not even a landscape, but on a small area, say up to 10,000 acres, with a group of landowners. Now moving forward, it's become apparent big time, especially some of the more recent research that has come out in the last few years about grassland fauna. We're losing a lot of these animals through time, and so we need to get serious about, making a bigger change than on a focal area or on a shotgun approach. We need to make more landscape change to build more marginal habitat for these species to prosper, or stabilize, I should say, moving forward.
And we've had good focused approach efforts. The CREP, Conservation Reserve Program, Enhancement Program in Kentucky. It was all put in the Green River Watershed, which is, I can't ever remember if it is it's definitely one of the most diverse aquatic ecosystems as far as mussels and that kind of stuff, endangered, in the nation. And so basically we worked with partners, TNC, NRCS, FSA, to put a focused effort on a huge landscape. I think it ended up being, we had 100,000 acres that we could put into this program, where we paid landowners really good money to set property aside for planting these native warm season grasses or trees in the name of water quality. In doing that, though, we also saw, which Cody alluded to, the idea of once we impacted that many acres on a landscape, we definitely saw an increase of quail and other grassland species that benefited. So, a focused approach, or even a bigger focused approach, we've definitely shown that it makes a difference. So that's kind of the goal again going down. The thing we also got to keep in mind, though, one of the downfalls with private lands with CREP is they only had a short window that people could sign up. People sold property, people passed away, and the idea that the program went away for the largest part, and people couldn't re-enroll it. So after 10 or 15 years, we saw this huge benefit, environmental benefit from a program, But once the funding wasn't there, it's starting to slowly slip away. So it's the importance of trying to integrate wildlife management into a working system is going to be the wave of the future for us to get this stuff done. Doing those kind of projects are great, and they definitely get us down the road, but it's all short-lived as far as the downside of private land. It can be short-lived. So we got to think about the bigger, better picture of getting it all so it's all working, so it all works together.
So I guess the idea is that if you can integrate habitat conservation into a working landscape, then it just makes sense, right? It's going to continue on because it makes sense financially for the landowner to do it, rather than an approach where you may take some areas out of conservation or out of production for conservation, but with like CRP, that's a 10-year contract, and who knows what's going to happen at the 10 years? Is the same owner going to own it, or is that program even going to be around in 10 years? That kind of stuff, right? So you're kind of trying to get it integrated so much that it just makes sense to do it.
Well, and that's kind of the key to all this is the idea of making it such a everyday thing that I'm not needed anymore. That management is being done on such a scale, or the way the land is being used in such a way is benefiting wildlife. And therefore I'm not needed because it's just going hand in hand. There's some good examples with, grouse in Wisconsin. They benefit from the timber management that's done in northern Wisconsin. I mean, it's a byproduct. The grouse is a byproduct of the management. If you took that industry away from northern Wisconsin, grouse wouldn't be such widespread on that landscape. So it's kind of the same way as we want to get to here, is where, the way the land is being used is benefiting the species across the board.
Awesome. So I want to get back to your example of the two kind of focused projects you had on native grasses and cattle operations and foraging. And so it sounds like you're kind of using those as like demonstration and launching points to kind of show the proof of concept, like, hey, you can do this on your farm. It makes sense, that kind of stuff. So what's been the reception in the county? Are they, are other landowners looking over here at, Gary Farmer saying, what's that guy doing? He just killed a bunch of his fescue and is planting these crazy grasses? Or are they looking at it saying, look at Gary Farmer's cattle, they're fat and happy in the drought in August?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it truly is at this point a proof of concept. So we've in Kentucky we've done a little bit of this, and there's private landowners in the state that have adopted these practices on their own, and that have been grazing natives. There's some examples of people grazing natives for the last 20 years, right? So this concept has definitely existed in production farming in the state of Kentucky. It hasn't at a scale like I mentioned. 99.9% of it is grazing cool season grass, essentially. And so at this point, we pick up one or two landowners every growing season so far. And so at this point, people aren't coming at us and breaking down the doors for this stuff. And so
we're not running away either, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're still working with them. The establishment side of this has been a difficult part that we're trying to work through right now. It seems like there's examples of areas where the grass was established very well. It came up very densely, and it looks like great stands to graze cattle on. There's other situations where it didn't come up at all, right? And so we're going back in and working with those individuals again and trying to build this forage base as a proof of concept and say, hey, this works. It's August. Let's all go out and look at how green this grass is right next to your cool season grass. It's brown and crispy, and the cows are hanging out in the pond because they don't want to have anything to do with it, right? And so that's what we're trying to get to as our proof of concept. And yeah, it's definitely, like I said, a successful farmer, whether it's Indiana row crop guy, man or woman, or somebody grazing cattle in Kentucky, the successful ones are, they're not the ones jumping on to the newest, biggest thing, right? They're the ones that take measured action and stuff. And so we're hoping to break into that through time. We're in this, Jacob and I think, sometimes talk about this. We're in this for the long haul, right? So we're trying little baby steps here to try to get individuals to think about this in a different way. And hopefully at some point, like Jacob mentioned, they'll have no need for us because these animals that are in decline will be stabilized because they're a byproduct of farming practices that benefit the wildlife. They do benefit the wildlife, but they mostly benefit the production aspect of it, whether it's the timber industry in northern Wisconsin or whether it's precision ag in West Kentucky. It's just stuff that makes sense for them and, would be hugely beneficial to wildlife.
Awesome. So when your private lands biologists go out and meet with these landowners that are in these working landscapes, whether they're foresters or whether they're row crop farmers or cattle producers, right? How do those conversations look like? What are the hooks that biologists are using to get them to at least try this kind of stuff out, right? Because I think when you talk to someone who's all engaged and all about wildlife, maybe owns a recreational property and their sole interest is managing wildlife, those conversations are pretty easy, right? Because they're already hooked.
Mm-hmm.
They're already totally engaged in habitat management. Maybe you have to tweak some expectations or how they're doing practices, but how do you guys approach these conversations with these working landowners?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we thought hard about this. About how do we break into these individuals? Like we talked about before, these people, they're successful, large-scale farmers, you know what I mean? And again, that's oftentimes that doesn't mean that they're first to jump on to some new grass forage thing or some shiny new implement that's really going to, build capacity on your farm, right? They're conservative in their mindsets about how they run their operations. And again, that facilitates their success to date. And so what we have done through time is some of the stuff I was mentioning before. So first of all, we utilize our private lands biologists and their community connections. So really these people are they're going to the grocery store. They know of their family names and stuff. They're in the area. And so, we've utilized that relationship. And also we've asked other technical experts, so people beyond myself and Jacob, or even beyond our agency, our state. So we asked Dr. Pat Kaiser at the University of Tennessee Center for Native Grasslands to actually come to the state of Kentucky and talk to these farmers while the private lands biologist was there as well, and kind of talk about the benefits to the production side of it. So Dr. Pat Kaiser is a good wildlife biologist. He's an even better scientist of forage, right? And so he's coming in as kind of the ag side of stuff and kind of selling this. And then we come in as the technical experts on, implementing native grass. That's what we've been doing. We've been planting native grass for a really long time in the sole name of wildlife. But hey, that means that we know how to establish it on the landscape. So allow us to come in and establish this, not for wildlife, but for your production setting. So we've utilized outside experts to come in and communicate with these people, as well as, just a private lands biologist, coming in and being known by the community. And, they say, this guy, it's taken a long time. We didn't go out to these areas where there's been a private lands biologist on the job for 2 or 3 months, right? It's taken a really long time to develop these relationships. And so we really utilize that.
Right. So you may be rolling through the gate on some of these properties, and wildlife's like third or fourth thing down the list that you're even going to talk about, right? You're going to talk about lots of other things, benefits, and then hope those byproducts are wildlife. So they may not be mentioned in the first 20, 30 minutes of the visit, maybe later on, right?
Oh, yeah. And that's been a big change. It's been a big change to try to talk about, because, rightly so, the state agency is not looked at to help production landowners with their operations, right? And that's rightly so. Like, we're classically educated in ecology, biology, wildlife, stuff like that. In NRCS and extension personnel, ag extension personnel in the state, we've asked them to come with us and and kind of push this message. And they're really the forefront of this push, right? Especially in these communities. It's the ag extension people, the outside forage experts, and then it's our private lands biologists in the background saying, oh, by the way, I know how to plant this for you, and I can help you if something starts going sideways on the establishment of these grasses. And nobody's talking about wildlife, and honestly, wildlife has come up organically from a lot of these landowners. A lot of these guys still have bird dogs, or they used to have bird dogs back in the day. They used to be, maybe they used to know about quail a lot more. There used to be more quail around, and they still want that resource back. So these are generally older individuals that experienced a time when there was a lot more quail in these systems because of more of these more marginal areas on their properties and the properties surrounding theirs.
Awesome. I think it's an interesting approach that you guys have going on down there, and how you approach the private lands problem. That's kind of why we want to have these conversations, just see, hey, what are states doing, and what are they doing similarly, and what are they doing differently? And so one of the last questions I'll ask is what do you think is one of the most creative things that you guys are doing on private lands in your state, or maybe what are you most proud of?
At this point in time, as far as creative goes, I mean, I've been on meetings with people across the nation, private lands groups through the Midwest, through the Southeast, and everybody kind of has the same approach of trying to get out there. So I can't say we have anything that's like crazy outside the box. But what I do enjoy is the idea, and really NRCS here in Kentucky has started pushing these focused conservation projects where they're allowing partners, not just Fish and Wildlife, anybody across the state who has a conservation concern to bring it up to them and try to see how we can address it on a small scale. Not looking at trying the shotgun approach where we do stuff across the whole state. So through that, we've had the ability to come up with some good focused conservation projects, which they're calling them, and other states may be doing some of these too. Not for sure. I haven't heard necessarily a mention called that. So basically, what these are is the partner comes to NRCS and proposes a project. Then NRCS says, you know what, that sounds good. Everybody in the community supports it. We're going to take some money off the top of EQIP and put towards it. So it's money that the only people who are competing for it are within that project area. So again, we have 3 of them across the state this year, and a 4th one that just ended. I'll talk about a little bit. The 3 that we have getting ready to start in October of this year is the kind of the Cedar Management Oldfield Rejuvenation project in Mercer and Washington County, a grazing project in Greene County, and then a precision ag row crop in Butler County. So there's 3 of them there, and we're using those with the Working Lands for Wildlife for Bob White, and trying to look at different aspects of integrating the wildlife into the working lands. Another project that just ended, which was very successful, was the Ballard County Focused Conservation Project, which was all about trying to get moist soil on the landscape, to extend that period of moist soil through the migration for shorebirds and waterfowl as they go back up north. So basically giving incentives to put in moist soil units and keeping water on them at least until I think it's March 15th is the cutoff. And then they can drain them and get stuff planted in. But the whole idea, and what's really cool about that project is you had a lot of the people who signed up were duck hunters. So they understand what they're getting and the benefit they could have for hunting. But every one of them, if they had a moist soil already, they always would drain the water off, as early as they could to get that stuff dry out to get their crops in. What they did see, and which they're all really happy about, was the idea that they saw blue-winged teal sitting on these things all the way up into March, which they never saw before because they didn't have the ability. The water wasn't staying there. Either they didn't have the ability or they drained it too soon. What they didn't see, which is also important to us, is the shorebird aspect that they didn't probably pay attention to as much, but they definitely saw ducks longer through throughout, which helped. It was going to help with reproduction. So they're helping themselves, and if they don't realize it or not, by giving ducks resting places and places to feed as they go north. It'll increase the chance of productivity increasing on the breeding grounds. So it's pretty cool, these focus projects. I really do like them, and I like the effort of trying to. It gives us the ability to do outreach and set up education, because I'll keep going back to education. I think that is something that we need to make sure we push more and more, is the importance of educating people why they're doing it and how it is helping, not just what their goal is, but all these other stuff, how it all adds up. I really do like these focused conservation projects. You have anything, Cody?
Yeah, I think I'd go with that kind of those types of projects in the state. So back to the waterfowl one, most of these, anything we can do that moves in lockstep with kind of what's already happening, right? Most of these fields were already flooded. They were kind of asking them, hey, just leave it in there for a month or two, drain it off, and they could still plant it, right? So trying to figure out in the state where we can, again, we've talked about it a lot, but integrate, practices that again on the onset benefit the production landowner, but also benefit wildlife. And so I think that Jacob, what he talked about, we didn't dig into the cedar project he has though, but eastern red cedar is not really looked at. When someone sees this on their property, they don't see value in that. They don't see it as a giant white oak that they can go and get good timber prices on, right? And so thinking about, okay, how can we do this? Well, we pick out a landscape where, again, you have the area, you have the space for a mill. There's a mill there that's actually running it. There's a company there that actually needs the cedar products to build whatever they're building, and we start working around that again and showing people that this stuff does have monetary value. And oh, by the way, it's really going to help your turkey flock or the bobwhite in the area. Because again, going back to education, that's kind of the back end of this. But in my mind, trying to figure out, what can we do that's in lockstep with what's already happening, and tweak those things just very slightly, can make marginal wildlife habitat that could mean a big difference on that landscape scale, for sure.
Awesome. Those are good examples. So anything else about the Kentucky Private Lands program that you want people to know about before we hop off here?
I just want everybody to know that, like I said, I have 17 biologists across the state. Website, fw.ky.gov. If you go to landowner contacts, you'll be able to find the contact for your biologist in your county. Feel free to reach out to them, call them. They're waiting for your call, and see what they have to help you with. Even if you're kind of just on the edge of not understanding what everything is, give them a call. Let them have a conversation. They're all really good biologists and can help you, guide you down the way to meet your objectives. I push this with my biologist is we're not here to sell you something. We're here to help you get to meet your goals, and we hope on the way it helps us as well. But we're not salesmen. We're not here to sell you anything. We're here to inform you. I guess go back to education. It's all about education and letting you know what's out there. The money side is a definite bonus, but there's a whole lot of opportunities for you to do stuff, just to tweak stuff that doesn't even necessarily cost money. It may be, don't bush hog your field at a certain time. You can still bush hog, but let's just tweak when and how you do it. It doesn't necessarily cost you extra money. It may actually save you money because you won't be bush hogging as much. So just feel free to give us a call. Let us have a conversation.
Yeah, we'll put the website in the show notes so people can find that as well.
Perfect. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, I appreciate you all joining us today to talk about what's going on in the Bluegrass State with private lands conservation. I think that you guys covered some good ground, and hopefully there's some folks that are listening that will reach out and get you some more work on private lands.
No doubt.
Thank you for your time, Jared, and again, thank you for everybody for listening.
Habitat University is hosted by Purdue Extension and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, and is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network.
The network is supported by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you liked Habitat University, subscribe and listen to the other podcasts in the Natural Resources University Podcast Network.
Iowa State University and Purdue University are equal opportunity, equal access, and affirmative action institutions.